I'm Roby Price, and welcome to my workshop.
Well, I'm just back from the home center. Got about 4 sheets of plywood in the back. I'm going to build some rolling bins to go underneath my shelves. I tell you, that plywood, it is some kind of expensive, especially for what you get. I don't think you're going to be too impressed with the quality of the material, but it's about the best you can get these days. For shop build stuff, maybe it's good enough. Let's see what we can put together. I'll see you inside.
Tools, jigs, and accessories for the shop. Rolling storage.
Plywood's out of the truck, and I've got 6 sheets right here, but we started with 8. I've got 2 more right here. I've already built one of these things. We'll call it a prototype. And with most prototypes, you learn a few things along the way, and we'll be incorporating some of those learnings into the next 3. This is a big, big rolling bin. Let me pull it out for you. A lot of room in here, and as a matter of fact, I've got this one loaded up with various pieces, and it's already made a big difference. By the time we get the next 3 done, I hope to be off tables. We've got to start this project. We're using what I would call hand power tools. The only tool that I've got hooked up right now is my table saw, and it's on that one lonely little plug. So we'll be using a lot of hand tools, a lot of track saws, and it'll seem a little primitive. And we're working with a very primitive plywood. This stuff, the quality is a little questionable. But we'll persevere, and we'll get these done. And we'll get started right now. We're going to cut these front panels first. They're 70 inches long by 17 deep. We'll cut the full sheet of the plywood, and we'll get these 21-inch panels on the sides for free. So 3 sheets of plywood, each 1 sheet for both of these. I can't get 3 out of them, they're just too big. So it'll be 3 sheets of plywood, and we'll cut these into strips. So let's get over to our sawhorses. I'm getting ready to cut the edge here. I never trust the factory edge. So I'll make my first pass here, and then we'll start measuring for strips. It just gets so beat up, it's not worth having. Well, I'm set up from my first panel, and I have to make 6 of these. Have you noticed what's different? I've turned my track around. I'm going the opposite direction. I cut this one going this way. I'm cutting the other one going that way. Why is that? Well, the blade has a width, and we measure off this little rubber gasket right there on this track to where we want to cut. That tells us where to put the track. But if I go this way, I've lost my blade width. Quite frankly, I don't really care what the blade width is. I care where the edge of this track is. So watch that. These little things, these little errors can cause you problems later in the project because they have a tendency to multiply. I've cut all my pieces to width. What you see here is one of the fronts or the backs, depending upon where it is. And this panel will be cut to 70 inches long. Now what's left will be cut to 21 inches long, and that's going to end up being a side. And that's exactly what we want. But we always start on a piece of plywood. We're going to trim the edge off here to give ourselves a good clean cut. That factory edge isn't worth having. Now, I have got 2 clamps right here because when we narrowed up the board, we have a whole lot less friction. I'm also tapping on this short edge right here. This will turn, even on the track. There's just no way about it. So this is a much safer way to do it. So my dust collection is hooked up, and it's as simple as making a quick cut. Also, I'm using a shorter track. It sure makes it a lot simpler than having that 4 foot, actually 4.5 foot track to do this small stuff. Getting ready to cut my panel this way, and there's a couple of things that are a little different. First of all, track is reverse directions because I want the blade on the outside of the cut. So we've turned it over from the other end. I'm going to make a mark here, a single mark at 70 inches. And I'm not going to make 2 and try to align this way. I'm going to use my speed square here to get this aligned. And now that I've got it aligned here, I realize that's not where it needs to be. This is what we're lined up on. Be careful with that. It's an easy mistake to make. Now, get both sides flush till those tick marks just touch the edge. And once you've got it there, take your clamp, if it will cooperate, and this one has this time. For a short span like this, you only need 1. It's not going to move too much. Now, this back hose is going to try to catch on this edge. So you need 3 hands for this. So instead of holding down up here, usually I try to manage my hose and cord so it doesn't get caught on something. Pull back because you want the front end to come down first, but you want both tracks, both alignment guides engaged with the track. It also helps to align these sawhorses this way. I mean, it's all part of using a track system. Frankly, I prefer foam board, but there is some advantages to this because making longer cuts in the center, it's easier this way. I'll catch you on the next cut. This last panel is 21 inches this way, but I'm going to turn him around, and there's a reason. Remember I told you that these panels have a tendency to slip when you push through the track? Well, this is going to be no different. I'm going to pull this sawhorse out a little bit. Every inch I get distance on this is going to create more moment resistance, and that's a little engineering lingo there. So same procedure as before, and the only reason I'm putting this in is it pays to be aware of where you are and how you're making a cut. This track saw system is fantastic as long as you realize you're not on a table saw. You've got to secure your piece, and that's what we're doing here. And again, that's my square edge. Let's square it up with a speed square. Make sure we're good. And then it's as simple as making the cut. Saw's over there, you don't need to see that. But just keep in mind, this is important so we don't twist when we make our cut. We're cutting the perimeter frames for the bottom panel, and for the long, we will go completely long, so it will be end to end. For the other sides, it'll be interior. I can get, with one board, I can get one interior and one long out of that, and that's what we'll do. For the middle one, there will be a middle interior, and that will have to come from another board. So again, I always like to put my own edge on this, and we will do that with a speed square. Eyeball it right here, get the speed square in just right. And we are 68 inches, 68 1/2 inches to the other side. And when we do this, we want to measure the blade, put the blade on it on that side of the line so that we maintain our dimension. Now we've got 6 more of these to go, so let's go ahead and get busy on that. This is one of the cutoffs, and I'm pretty happy with my cutoff edge here, so I'm going to keep it. I have taken a measure between the boards, and I need 18 inches. So I've got a table saw here, and it's easier to work with smaller sections here than it is to try to put 2 sawhorses this close together and then cut it. So this is the place to do it. Well, as I suspected, none of these are square. I haven't put them on the jointer, and it is construction grade lumber. This one over here was a little bit out, and that was easy enough to do. All I had to do was touch on this back edge of the plywood, drop my grip a little bit farther and suck it in, and then I set my screws, and that was pretty much it for that. Unfortunately, this one is bowing in. That's a little harder problem. If you've got one of these clamps, you can turn it around. This side is ordinarily on that side, and we use these things to grip, but they also separate. So, and of course I don't have enough room here, so I've got 2 2x4s underneath, and I can take this in the middle and expand this out and push this board into square. It's a little too much. All right, that's looking good there. That's looking fine. So at this point, with my marks made, I can set the screws and I can hold him in place. I have got this board into place now. Just need to take a few measures. 3 inches, 3 inches, and the middle. And then we'll go ahead and set these screws into place. When I finish this one, I'll do the other 2. All the frames are done, and I'm getting ready to put the holes in for my casters. And I'm going to index these on the frame right here. And I want to do this now before too much else gets built up and it gets hard to have access to this. So I've got 5/16 inch holes, I've got a 5/16 inch bit, and I'm going to move this caster up right here, and I'm going to start drilling holes. And all that sounds good, but there's a little bit of an issue here. Well, I can probably get through with this one. You can already tell that the chuck is going to hit that. So let's get the hole started with this bit, because I have more control over it this way. Now bear with me. The chuck on this bit is considerably smaller, and it'll be easier to get closer. I don't have a drill extension, a bit extension, That's probably something I should invest in. But this will do for now. And as you can see, even that isn't perfect. We'll do the rest of them this way. It's not optimal, but it works. And I've got a good straight hole for probably about 95 to 98% of the distance. So I think this is fine. And besides, my hardware is going to be 1/16 less in diameter. So all things will fit. It'll be good. It's time to start looking at the sides. And we'll do the long sides first. They have the biggest impact. The center sides here will go in afterwards. And then we'll put in a corner brace to tie it all together. But first, let's take a look at what we've got here. I've got this panel right here, and it's indexed on the sawhorses, as is this bottom panel. So what we really want to do is we want to index, because we've got a panel that's right here, against the plywood, and make sure that we're flush right there. And we are. And that's because I took a look at it before off camera. So we're going to take this right here and put an F-style clamp in place and hold him tight. Okay, it's not going anywhere. And we're going to use these same screws that we've been using, these 2-inch screws, to secure him. Now I've got lines marked 2 inches up. I'm not drilling into the plywood. That wouldn't be a strong joint. I'm drilling into the 2x4, the lower 2/3 of it. So that's what's going to secure this initially. After that, we'll put our panels in place, and then we'll put our corner blocks. My sides are glued on, screwed on and glued on. And the base is square and these sides are square, but and by the way, the end is square, but if you'll look at this, there is nothing square about this. It has the potential to be square, but it is not. It is well out, and part of this is because the plywood is warped. So what are we going to do? We're going to force him into place, and when we do, it's going to be catty corner. We're going to take a piece of plywood and a piece of plywood right here, and we're going to take a clamp, and we're going to clamp it down such that the top of that edge and the bottom of that edge are even with this. That will square this up, or close to squaring it up with this edge here. We'll do the same thing to the other side. Then we'll take a set of clamps, thread it through, and we'll clamp it this way. Now, all that's going to be a dry fit. So what do we do next? We take ourselves a 2x4 and we put him right here in the corner. We slather it up with glue on this side and that side, and then we drive home some screws. Now you've noticed that this is a little bit shy of the top. That's because I want my top to come all the way in and land inside the case. Now why is that? Well, again, we've got warping problems coming this way. So when the case is closed, it's going to force this into a square shape, and that's the objective. Now you may be asking, what if it's out that way? We'll come to that later, and if need be, we may put a locking latch on top to help suck it in. Eventually, it's going to conform to this shape. It just takes time. And right now, I don't have that much time, so I need to finish this. We're going to go ahead and glue this up right now.
One of the secrets to a successful operation is making sure you have all your clamps and all your pieces within ready access. After I get the first vertical clamp in place, I want to make sure that the edges are flush, so I use a little persuasion to get them to line up just so. The same thing is true with the other side. Vertical clamps have gotten everything more or less square. We'll put the horizontal clamps in place to make sure that the edges are absolutely tight. We'll do a little bit of final alignment and then take those corner blocks, put a bead of glue on each edge and set them in place. All that careful prep work and I forgot the drill and the screws. About a half a dozen screws per corner and we're done. The other side is exactly the same.
Well, as you can see, my sides are installed. Part of that process is to actually install corner braces, and those are nothing more than 2x4s that this side screws into and that side screws into, and that marries up this corner incredibly strong. And we've got one in this corner and this corner, those two corners, as you would expect. We also have one up front, and that's to keep the lid from coming too far down. We do not have one back here, and that's because we'll have a hinge here, and the hinge will do that job. Now, as you can see the barrel right here, we have to put a mortise in to get that to fit. But first, we're going to be putting in our wheels. And for our wheels, we're going to be using 1/4 inch hardware, and I will have a washer and a nut and another washer here that's not shown, but I'll have this little hex nut here. I like the ones with the little nylon bit on top. That saves me the trouble of using a lock washer, and they really do work. They stay in place nicely. I also don't like using a wrench on it. I'd rather use a socket. So in my drill, I've got a socket for the nut, and I will follow up the other side with this guy right here. This is a little grip. It's got a hex side on one side and a square on the other, and you can do a lot with this. This is a good item. If you can find them, I suggest you get one, or maybe two. When you put up underneath and you start ratcheting this down, you don't need more than hand tight to get it very tight. This is a good item. Installing the hinge requires we put a mortise in, and I think you can just barely see the lines. I've already taken the time to mark them out. To do that, I'm going to use a vibratory tool. I find this makes pretty short work. The whole trick to this is you don't have to be perfect with this. All I'm looking for in this is when I screw this in place is to have this top plate level with the top of this, and in doing so, that will keep the top plate level. So if you have one of these, it's fine. You can also make this with a little saw and a coping saw, or you can do it with a chisel, although I don't recommend that with plywood. But, you know, choose whichever method you desire. One of the things you got to be careful with on these hinges is we got to keep in mind that the plate that sits on top, we want it even with this edge. So what I've done is I have put in a piece of scrap, same type plywood, and I have clamped it in place here even with this edge. So when I set this hinge down, it's exactly where I want it to be. Not only that, I gripped it right there. So now it's just a matter of drilling the holes and installing the hinge. This is one of the changes that I made. I noticed that this was a problem on the first unit, so I've changed my approach here. Additionally, something you'll note is that my corner blocks are sideways now, so I can still get close to the edge and I don't have to cut away or chip away to get the bolts in place. This is a much better installation. This is going to be much simpler. So keep that in mind when you build your frames around these things, is that you want your hinges in 3 places to help keep this plate flat, and one of them is as close to that edge as you can get, and you don't want your frames getting in the way. The top is laid in, and I've got a 1/16 inch clearance front to back, but what I've tried to do is close that off because I want to be tight against the back when I drill these holes, so if there's any movement, we're good on that. And additionally, because the board was bowed a little bit this way, I have pushed down the edges on either side, and that is to keep it flat and straight. So the next step is to drill the holes, and then it's a little bit tedious. We have to tighten the bolts up and then lay the top back down again, hopefully keeping them where they need to be there's going to be some movement. It's just the way it is. Additionally, when we finally do get everything put together, we may need to take this front edge and trim it back. It's totally flat right now, and to come up, the bottom edge could hit. So we may need to get our track saw out again and bevel that edge so that it will open correctly. We'll just see how much we've got. When I take these two clamps on top off, I get a little less than a 16th, maybe a 32nd. It might be enough. We'll see soon.
Lifting the lid with the bolts half engaged is hard enough. Doing it without a couple of supports in place is almost impossible. Get yourself a back support like I've got and things will go a whole lot smoother. I've got 2 to 3 bolts in each one of the hinges, and now I'm going to take a little bit of time and I'll put a washer on one side and a nut with that nylon stop on the other side. I'm going to do that for all 3 hinges. This is one of the areas where that little blue grip comes in real handy. It makes short work of this process. With a ratchet drill, you can go through here and be done in no time.
All the bolts are in, and it opens and closes. I would recommend you having a stop there, because if you push this thing too far back, you're gonna bust up your hinges and maybe your lid. I have noticed that we are tight here and here. So we're going to take a block plane, and don't try that at home, by the way. Not unless you have a really, really sharp blade and a little persistence. We're going to start by beveling, like I said, a little bit off the underside. See if we can get him to fall into place. Got a little more on this side than I do on this side, but you know, all in all, this ain't a bad fit for really bad plywood. You have to have a handle on the front, because when you push this thing all the way in the back, although this one's a good one, the clearances are so tight you can't get your finger in. As a matter of fact, on certain places, this will just bump just a touch. So, in all honesty, I could probably take about a 1/4 inch off, but I don't think I'm going to. So, what I want to do is place him. These screws are in the middle, so that's fine. I'll just locate this. I'll eyeball this just so that the steel on both sides is centered up, and I'll mark the first 2, drill the pilots, casters work pretty good. And then I'll set the first couple of screws and use these to position the piece so that I don't have to hold it in place by hand. Well, that's about it. I've gotten the chains installed on all 4 of them. The lid's open very nicely, and more importantly, they close. A little bit of a whisper there. That's a lot to expect from really low-grade plywood. But we got it in the end. Now, the only thing left for me to do is to clean up a little bit and to start putting stuff in here. Hopefully, I can get off my tables, which are over there out of view, and clear out a lot of the stuff that is on these shelves that is just haphazardly stored. Storing things correctly where you could get to it takes more space, so I suspect there will still be a lot of stuff on those shelves. This is also on wheels, and that's important because in about a month, we're going to get an epoxy floor in this room, and in the study, in my office, and in the side room back there. And a week later, everything has to come out of the back here, including what was already there, because the back room is going to get an epoxy floor as well. So that's something I've been looking forward to a long time, But the idea of taking each individual thing off these shelves is a nightmare. So these wheels will help enormously. I'm getting ready to get them all loaded up, but I won't put you through that. However, feel free to come back and join me next time in the workshop.